modern movies have a sound problem.
This shall appear.
What the hell is going on?
In fact, around 70% of people now say they watch movies and TV shows with the subtitles turned on. But why is dialogue so difficult to hear? Is Hollywood mixing movies wrong, or do we all just have a hearing problem? Today we're breaking down the real reason modern movies are so hard to hear and why it's not really your fault. Let's dive in. To understand why dialogue has become so hard to hear, we first must go back to the early days of filmmaking. Before 1927, movies didn't have any synchronized dialogue. During the silent era, screenings would often include live performers in the theaters who attempted to lip-sync the dialogue and music instead. There were short films during this time that tried to sync audio and picture by using an invention by W.K. Dickinson called the kinetophonograph. The viewer would look through the kinetoscope, which played the film, and then at the same time, the phonograph would play audio. The issue with this was that the synchronization wasn't mechanical or electronic. It was all done by hand, so it often fell out of sync. In 1924, a company by the name of Western Electric released the Vitaphone. This solved a majority of the synchronization issues that the kinetophonograph had. Instead of being done manually, the Vitaphone played 16-inch discs on a turntable and was mechanically linked to a projector so that the audio and visuals would play at the exact same time. The Vitaphone wasn't perfect by any means, but it was the invention that brought synchronized sound to Hollywood. In 1926, the film Don Juan, starring John Barrymore, became the first feature-length film to utilize the technology. There wasn't any dialogue in this movie, but there was music and sound effects that were all in sync. A year later, in 1927, the jazz singer released and became known as the first talkie. Even though most of the film still used intertitles and synchronized music, this scene alone changed the direction of cinema forever.
Wait a minute, you ain't heard nothing yet.
After the release of The Jazz Singer, audiences wanted more movies with dialogue, and talkies quickly became the norm. In the early days of recording sound, filmmakers used one large microphone that would hang over actors. These early mics required actors to really enunciate their speech and speak loudly, which almost made their performances feel a bit theatrical, but in return, you could clearly hear what they were saying. This is also why you often see all the actors standing beside each other in older films, because they all had to talk into the same mic. It's also important to mention audio editing wasn't really a thing during this time. If an actor messed up a line, spoke too quietly, or the crew made too much noise, they just have to redo the entire scene. Due to the lack of editing that could be done to the audio, it was crucial for actors and the crew to capture it clearly and correctly. As the technology improved, more tools were introduced. By the early 1930s, optical sound on film became the standard, pushing out the Vitaphone. Now sound was recorded directly onto the film strip. Along with this came dedicated sound mixing consoles that Hollywood studios began using around 1931. These mixers had multiple input channels and allowed the volume of recordings to be controlled. The technology only improved more and more as the years went on, introducing new types of microphones, mixers, and ways to edit audio. As great as all these improvements and new technology are, it's also a huge reason dialogue has become so hard to hear. When it comes to recording dialogue for modern movies, it's not just one microphone recording all the sound. On big film and TV sets, if there's two actors speaking, for instance, they might each have a boom microphone dedicated just to them. On top of this, they'll have lav microphones attached to them, and there might even be other microphones hidden within the scenes. This seems great because now there's multiple high-quality mics recording everything, but it's also pushed actors to put on more realistic and natural performances. If an actor is supposed to be whispering or mumbling, they just do it how they actually would in real life. No longer do actors try to enunciate their speech or speak loudly because there's so many microphones recording, and it can just be cleaned up in post. This of course makes the performance feel more real, but it also leads to dialogue that's very hard to understand or hear. One of the best examples of this is Tom Hardy as Bane in The Dark Knight Rises.
Oh, you think darkness is your ally? You merely adopted the dark.
When the film released, one of the biggest criticisms was that it was nearly impossible to understand Bane. Christopher Nolan, the director of The Dark Knight Rises, has a reputation as the director who often has hard-to-hear dialogue in his films. There's a couple reasons behind this, one of them being that he prioritizes the original performance. In the case of The Dark Knight Rises, Tom Hardy had pitched his voice for Bane to Nolan before they began filming. Hardy found his inspiration for it from a man called Bartley Gorman, who was a Welsh bare-knuckle boxer. Taking Bane's voice in this direction added a lot of personality to the character and made Bane stand out from other villains, but putting that style of voice behind a mask only made it even more difficult to understand. Nolan didn't care though, he enjoyed the performance and preferred keeping it original and natural. They did go back and remix Bane's dialogue a little bit after complaints during early screenings of the film, but Nolan didn't back down on scrapping the voice entirely and defended the creative and artistic choice. There were certainly films before The Dark Knight Rises that had dialogue that was hard to hear, but in a lot of ways, Christopher Nolan normalized the idea that dialogue doesn't have to be crystal clear, and he's continued this philosophy throughout his career with other films such as Interstellar and Tenet. He's also one of the most successful directors in modern filmmaking, so of course his approach and style has only influenced other filmmakers. In a similar way to Nolan prioritizing the original performance and artistic choices, the sound in his films, from the music to the sound effects, play a huge role in creating their atmosphere and making them immersive. This has become standard across the industry. Instead of dialogue sitting at the front of the mix and essentially being the star, now the sound effects and music basically sit at the same exact level. There's also been an increase in the amount of sounds going on in films, so it's become very difficult to find room in the mix to let the dialogue shine. Audiences crave movies that get their endorphins running. That's why many of the most successful films in the box office are the ones that are fast-paced, thrilling, full of action, and special effects. If you have ambient noises, explosions, gunshots, car chases, and fight sequences happening while dialogue is occurring, it's going to be nearly impossible for it not to get buried. You can't just simply turn up the volume on the dialogue tracks to make it louder, because doing this will take away from everything else going on. Imagine the sound of someone's voice being at a higher volume than a massive explosion. Not only would it not make sense, but that explosion wouldn't have any impact. Prioritizing the atmosphere that can be created with sound certainly does make movies feel more exciting, but it comes at the cost of sacrificing dialogue. Streaming services have made it extremely common to watch movies at home instead of going to the theaters. A survey done by HarrisX in 2024 found that 2/3 of US adults prefer watching movies at home. Even though more people than ever are skipping the theater, movies are still being mixed for theaters. This is a huge factor in why dialogue has become harder to hear and why many of us turn on the subtitles. When a film's being mixed, it's being done on huge theatrical mixing stages that have full range speakers and either have a 5.1, 7.1, or Dolby Atmos setup. The average person watching a movie at home probably doesn't have a surround sound setup. So instead of having a central speaker dedicated to just the dialogue, all of the sound, including the music and sound effects, are playing through the same speakers. Even if you have a soundbar that is better than the built-in speakers on your TV, all of the sound is still being downmixed to play through it. This results in dialogue getting buried even more than it might have already been in the original mix done for theaters. Plus, a lot of soundbars also crank up the bass, which doesn't help at all. Most industry standard TVs only have speakers that push sound out the back or downward, and not ones that face forward. These types of speakers are not able to reproduce the mid-level frequencies that voices sit at. So of course, dialogue is not easy to hear. You might also be wondering why some TV shows still have a problem with dialogue. A lot of the big series like Game of Thrones or Stranger Things, for example, still do the mix on big sound stages like the ones used for movies. TV shows have shifted towards a more cinematic experience, so they run into a lot of the same issues. Then to make things just a little worse, streaming services also compress sound heavily to save on bandwidth and file size. This is done to reduce costs and improve user experience by minimizing buffering and making it easier to stream on slower internet connections. By compressing the sound, details are lost. For music and sound effects, it's less noticeable, but compression on dialogue removes things like breathing sounds and consonants. This can make voices sound flat, more muffled, and harder to understand. Even if you watch the same movie on streaming and then on Blu-ray, you'd notice a difference immediately. But as consumers, we've opted for convenience over quality. So what's the solution? Subtitles, at least for now. Movies today are being mixed for the theaters and to create an immersive experience, which often means sacrificing the clarity of dialogue. Add to this actors putting on more natural performances and audiences choosing to stream movies at home, it's all led us to where we are now. The film industry is constantly evolving, so maybe one day we'll be able to turn those subtitles off, or maybe we'll just end up back where movies started, without dialogue at all. I guess time will tell. I'm curious to hear what movies you've had a hard time hearing. Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to drop a like and consider sharing it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.